So here's a question for you. Why do diamonds, which are supposed to be millions and millions of years old, still contain carbon-14? Today we're going to explore a completely different way of looking at our planet's history, using the same scientific data but with a very different instruction manual.
Okay, let's just dive right into this, because it's a puzzle that really gets to the heart of the matter. We're all taught that diamonds are incredibly ancient, formed over millions, maybe even billions of years. But here's the thing that's so strange. Scientists keep finding carbon-14 inside them. And carbon-14, well, it decays pretty fast. It has a half-life of just over 5,700 years, which means it should be completely gone after 100,000 years, let alone millions. So, what on earth is going on?
Now, this isn't a story about science versus faith. Not really. It's about how the exact same evidence, the rocks, the fossils, the carbon readings, can lead you to two wildly different conclusions. It all depends on the lens you're using to look at the past. It's all about your starting assumptions.
So on one side, you have what's called the naturalistic uniformitarian paradigm, or NUP for short. This is the standard view you'd find in most geology textbooks. It basically assumes that all the slow processes we see today, like erosion and continental drift, have always happened at pretty much the same slow pace. But on the other side, you've got the biblical catastrophic paradigm, or BCK. And this framework, it starts with the biblical account, which includes massive, world-changing events, like a global flood that reshaped our entire planet and did it fast.
And I want to be really clear here. The goal is not to attack or dismiss scientific data. It's actually the opposite. We're going to take a look at how those very same observations can fit perfectly into this alternative, catastrophic model. It's all about re-examining how we interpret the facts we all have.
So, let's circle back to that carbon-14 mystery. It is the perfect case study to see these two paradigms in action. The fact that we're finding C14 in things that should be ancient is this nagging little problem that the catastrophic model tries to explain head-on.
And seriously, it's not just diamonds. Detectable amounts of carbon-14 have been found in coal seams that are supposedly hundreds of millions of years old. They're found in fossils that are said to be just as ancient. Now, according to the standard timeline, the C14 in these samples should have vanished completely eons ago, and yet, there it is. And this really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? From the standard viewpoint, this is usually brushed off as contamination, but the findings are so consistent across so many different labs and samples that for supporters of the BKP model, it's not a mistake, it's a clue. A massive clue that maybe our assumptions about the deep past are off.
The biblical catastrophic paradigm offers a pretty fascinating answer. And it all starts by imagining a very, very different ancient world, the one that existed before the Genesis flood.
All right, so the BKP model for carbon-14 basically has three stages. First, picture a pre-flood world. The model suggests it had a much stronger magnetic field, which means way less C14 was being created in the atmosphere to begin with. Then, stage 2, the flood. This event violently buried enormous amounts of carbon from plants and animals, completely resetting the world's carbon cycle. And finally, stage 3, the post-flood world. C14 levels start to slowly rise and build up over thousands of years, eventually reaching the balance that we see in our atmosphere today.
Think of it like this. If you walk into a bathroom and see a half-full bathtub, you could try to calculate how long the water's been running. But your calculation only works if you assume the tap's flow has been constant the whole time. What if it was just a slow trickle for hours, and someone only cranked it to full blast a few minutes ago? Your calculation would be totally wrong. The BKP model suggests the tap for C14 production was turned way up after the flood.
So here's the critical point. Radiocarbon dating works by comparing the C14 in a dead thing to the C14 levels in the atmosphere today. It assumes that this ratio has been more or less stable. But what if it hasn't been? If an animal living before the flood had a tiny amount of C14 to begin with, then even after just a few thousand years of decay, our modern instruments would look at it and think it's been decaying for tens of thousands of years. The age gets artificially inflated a lot.
This catastrophic model also tries to explain other curious details in the Bible, like the incredible drop in human lifespans. I mean, the Bible records people like Methuselah living for over 900 years before the flood. But right after, you see that number just plummet, generation after generation. What could possibly cause such a huge biological shift? Well, the BKP model connects this directly to that global catastrophe. The thinking is that the pre-flood Earth had a much more protective environment. Maybe it was a stronger magnetic field or a different kind of atmosphere, something that shielded life from harmful cosmic radiation. And that shield was severely damaged during the flood. The result? a new post-flood world with much more radiation hitting the surface, causing faster genetic decay and, well, much shorter lives.
So as you can see, the C14 puzzle and human lifespans are two big pieces, but the biblical catastrophic paradigm is a much bigger framework than that. It's a full-blown attempt to reinterpret pretty much all of geology and the fossil record through the lens of a global cataclysm. And the core ideas here are frankly radical compared to the standard view. It proposes that a single, year-long global flood did most of the heavy lifting in shaping the geology we see today. This includes the idea that continents didn't drift apart slowly, but were ripped apart rapidly. That the layers of rock we see in places like the Grand Canyon weren't laid down over eons, but in a matter of months. And that the order of fossils in those rocks doesn't actually show evolution over time, but something else entirely.
Let's look at one key part of this: catastrophic plate tectonics. This theory suggests that during the flood, the ocean floor started sinking into the Earth's mantle at a runaway speed. This would cause the tectonic plates to move at meters per second, not centimeters per year. This process would have unleashed unbelievable geological energy, forming our current ocean basins and pushing up massive mountain ranges in a very, very short amount of time.
So what about those fossils? The ecological zonation theory offers a completely different explanation for why they're ordered the way they are. Instead of seeing a slow progression from simple to complex life over millions of years, this theory suggests we're just seeing different habitats buried in order as the floodwaters rose. You'd expect to see things from the bottom of the ocean buried first, then creatures from the coastlines, then from the lowlands, and finally creatures from the highlands. That alone could create the general pattern we find in the fossil record.
And so, this brings us all the way back to where we started. It's not always about the data itself, but about the story we choose to tell to connect all the dots.
You see, the really key thing to understand here is that both the uniformitarian and the catastrophic models begin with an assumption about the past that can't be proven. No scientist was there millions of years ago to watch the rock layers form. We can only look at the evidence that exists in the present and use our chosen framework, our starting beliefs, to try and piece together what might have happened.
And the people who champion this biblical catastrophic paradigm would be the first to tell you that this isn't some final slam-dunk proof that ends all debate. It's presented as a working alternative model, a way of seeing how the historical accounts in the Bible and the physical evidence we find in nature might actually be understood as part of one single coherent story.
And that just leaves us with a final thought to mull over. If the scientific data itself, the carbon-14 in diamonds, the sequence of fossils, the way mountains are formed, can be plausibly explained by more than one story about the past, is it possible that an ancient book like the Bible actually holds the key to understanding the whole picture? It's a pretty profound question about how we know what we think we know about our own world.